Spectral phenomenon detected.
No. It's just a movie.
Oh, I thought that was a Class 5 Hat Man.
That's the Shadow Man.
Huh?
The film. Its name is Shadow Man.
Oh, well, that's very clearly the Hat Man.
Nobody appreciates this. Just enjoy the keynote.
Okay, I think that it's the Hat Man, but that's just me, I guess. So, is this based on the game?
Why else would they call it the Shadow Man? What are they, liars? No, it's not. I see that now. Thank you. What was that?
A sound file labeled thumbs up.
Oh. Wait, so the Hat Man is real?
Oh, no.
Then why did you have an alert for him?
I don't know, you programmed me.
But you know what he looks like.
Yes, I have been trained to identify an entity known as Hatman, based on an algorithm you built pulling from several forums, wiki pages, and websites that include various easily disprovable myths and conspiracy theories.
Alright. Well, that's good then. So you'll know if he's really here.
Let's go.
Shadow Man is a third-person action-adventure platformer, shooter, Metroidvania, and God, where the f*** is this thing? I give up. If I don't find this thing in the next 5 minutes, I'm gonna... Oh, there it is. Simulator, developed by what would come to be known as Acclaim Studios T-Side, following a consolidation of Acclaim Studios by the time of release, but was then known as Iguana UK, and published by Acclaim Entertainment for PC, Nintendo 64, PlayStation, and Dreamcast in the year 1999. The version featured most prominently in this video will be the 2022 Remaster from Night Dive Studios, which compiles content exclusive to certain releases and restores some cut segments as well. Development on Shadow Man would begin in 1997, and as is often the case with a successful video game adaptation of an existing IP, it began with a group of plucky developers endeavoring to create their own original idea, presenting it to their publisher and being met with, "That's great, love your energy. One thing, we recently acquired the rights to Mr. Magoo, so if you..." 3 years prior, Acclaim purchased Voyager Communications, and thus the comic book imprint Valiant Comics, responsible for a handful of comics that I'd wager a larger number outside comic heads know from video games more so than their funny book counterparts, such as Turok, Dinosaur Hunter, Armorines, and Shadow Man, which Iguana ultimately chose due to it being similar enough to the idea they originally proposed. A Resident Evil-like, starring an ex-New York cop turned rogue demon hunter that would eventually be brought to life in this game's second coming, or two-second coming if you will. And so the dev team was tasked with writing a sprawling, complex story based on a run of a comic that at that point only had about 4 issues completed. This granted a lot of freedom in determining a look and feel for Shadow Man, along the way pilfering the coolest aspects of films like Seseveninen, Silence of the Lambs, Jacob's Ladder, and the TV series Millennium. In an interview with Next Generation, one of the game's 2 design leads, Simon Phipps, describes development as sort of split by the 2 traversable worlds, giving the live side of things, the reality, a grounded tone that is intentionally less video gamey than the dead side, where wild dream logic can run rampant. Simon Phipps was a founding member of Core Design, responsible for the original Tomb Raider. He would exit the company following that game's release, but shares his desire here to make Shadow Man the Tomb Raider that he wished Tomb Raider could have been, a game where narrative and exploration were intertwined, hopping back and forth between areas as a story came together in bits and pieces rather than a somewhat linear sequence of levels. For the first year of Shadow Man's development, a different team at Iguana was allocated to create a game based on the comic Bloodshot. In Acclaim's run, the story of a government agent resurrected with experimental nanotechnology. Around October of 1998, this game, which was far enough along to have a demo, suffered a restructuring that it could not recover from. Initially planned as a PC game with console ports, according to an archived blog post from a programmer named Paul Taylor who worked on it, the PlayStation version was to be prioritized, and that required rewriting and stripping down many elements, undoing almost a year of work. Rather than start the process over again, Acclaim shelved Bloodshot, and the Shadow Man team would absorb them, ballooning from a team numbering around 15 to eventually over 60. Just the following year, Shadow Man would be unveiled to the world, and responses to it were mostly positive, with a heavy dependence on which release we're talking about. The Nintendo 64 version was seen as a welcome alternative to the console's typically family-friendly output. I think. I don't know, I've never actually owned one. I have no relationship with that console. Every word I've ever spoken about it was founded on deceit and conjecture. But make no mistake, I have an encyclopedic knowledge of every game ever made. Think of a game. I know it. Think of another game. No, think of another game. Wait, that's the... Psych! I fucking know that shit! Its PC version received high marks from magazines like CVG, which awarded it 5 out of 5 stars, complimenting nearly every aspect of it, especially its intuitive controls and expansive world, with the only clear and frankly valid complaint being the lack of a map in which to enjoy exploring said world, hiring presumably an excited 10-year-old to pen, "Shadow Man is undoubtedly the most horrific and disturbing game ever. You thought Resident Evil was scary? This game will literally make your skin crawl and will probably give you nightmares." On the other hand, its clearly rushed and poorly optimized PlayStation version was given a harsh reception. IGN would harangue its diminished graphic quality and crippling frame rate drops, scrawling in the maniacal chicken scratch of a 1990s games journalist. I was hooked from the first time I played it on the Nintendo 64, and then I played the PlayStation version and turned all pale, weak, and sad. I looked for a knife to my but my wife knew what I was going to do, having seen me this before after playing other bad games. So I just sat there and pulled out my remaining hair one strand at a time. I do feel a twinge of empathy for the development team that was forced to rush and knowingly hand over an incomplete port. That's gotta be an awful conclusion to 2 years of work, but I also feel a familiar disdain for organizations such as Acclaim. Worth noting that around this time, Acclaim did not have a sterling reputation. Not that I can directly point to a time when they did, but certainly the late 90s was the start of an unflinching reputational nosedive. And while this wave of comic book adaptations represented a bit of a riding of the ship, many gamers still associated them with media tie-in shovelware and strange publicity stunts like offering a cash reward for naming your child Turok, and an ever-lengthening scroll of lawsuits from former employees, investors, and even the Olsen twins. These bizarre five-head marketing ideas would continue well after Shadow Man, with a plan to put the logo for Virtua Tennis 2 on trained pigeons that would fly around the 2003 Wimbledon Championship, or offering to reimburse drivers that had received speeding tickets in order to promote Burnout 2 Point of Impact, which is actually pretty cool. And kind of peaking with the release of Shadow Man's sequel, which offered money in exchange for advertising the game on your loved one's headstone. There was predictably a moderate amount of finger wagging at this idea, which is, of course, in pretty bad taste. But also, like, what better escape is there from the crushing grief of loss than a game that posits that everyone winds up in a page from the Divine Comedy? Just what I want to think about when I'm over there pressing F. There's another interview with Simon Phipps as well as Guy Miller in the back of the official Acclaim strategy guide for Shadow Man, and both give sheepish responses around their involvement with the creation of Tomb Raider, with Phipps saying, "I previously worked at Core Design for about 7 years and was involved in doing everything from programming to art and design on variety of product." I think they missed a word there. A variety of products that no one has ever heard of. and I'd rather forget, including one based on Monty Python's Flying Circus. A quote I pull only to reiterate that I have heard of every game ever made. Doesn't matter if you claim this in print or in a YouTube thumbnail, I assure you, this is all I've ever cared about. Truly, one of the more interesting things in this interview is this prophetic answer given in response to the question, were there things you would have liked to include in Shadow Man but couldn't? Keep in mind, this book was published in 1999. Phipps jokingly caps off his answer with, certainly there's stuff that we could have improved on or maybe wished we had more time to really finish to our level of satisfaction. So expect a Shadow Man special edition in 20 years time with digitally enhanced effects but no Ewoks, which is actually like nuts. I mean, he definitely didn't mean this seriously and was just making a little jab at these Star Wars special editions, which was like the biggest nerd talking point for a full decade. And it's not like having a special edition out of a game was commonplace at the time, but he was only off by like a year and some change. That shit happened. Phipps said, I see you again in 20 years. Meanwhile, in the year 1992, Jim Shooter and Steve Englehart created the original iteration of Shadow Man. Jack Boniface, a New Orleans jazz musician by day and spandex-clad pummeler of the homeless at night. There isn't a lot of this guy in the video game Shadow Man because it's quite literally a different guy. But a handful of guys have taken up the mantle of Shadow Man, and this is the first. Not canonically, the first, that would be Maxim St. James, but Jack is the first that is made a protagonist, but that's just a clarification one needs to make on the internet when talking about comic books. Also, technically Jack first appears as like a background NPC in an issue of Exo Manowar, but that's just the sort of thing you have to say when you're talking about comic books on the internet. Think Batman meets Venom meets the sax player from that scene on the pier in The Lost Boys. Actually, mainly think about that, especially around the halfway point in the run. He just is that guy, discarding the PJs branded with the Shadow Man logo TM in favor of a leather-clad biker aesthetic and a mane of wild, untamed hair. This first series does cement a lot of key elements that will return, such as the voodoo priestess Nettie, Shadow Man's sometimes young, sometimes old creator and handler, but the biggest change from comic to game is tonal. For a while, this run mainly concerns Jack's successes and failures as a vigilante crime fighter, working his way up a hierarchical rogues gallery. Sometimes supernatural in nature, other times not. Sometimes it's just like a gang of Nazis or Steven Tyler of Aerosmith. But this was all an extended tutorial to a meeting with his arch nemesis, the number one fucker that created the need for Shadow Man in the first place, Dark with a Q. An immortal, near-invincible black magician that seemingly conquers and gathers power out of boredom. Having ascended beyond the trivialities of humanity and empathy, and presumably never finding something like a hobby or a thing to collect, records, fridge magnets, erotic sculptures, to use 3 entirely random examples, a coven of voodoo users was so concerned about this guy's power level that they created a sort of curse that would produce a champion in their conflict with Dark. For me, this run is sort of inconsistently interesting, but oddly endearing as well. I like that the central character is pretty clearly defined as 2 characters in one with an uneasy alliance. Whenever it's night and the shadow takes control, even Jack's inner monologue changes, referring to Jack as a separate entity with his own wants and struggles. And once he finally starts pondering the purpose and origin of his abilities, it develops proper hooks. Much like Spawn, Jack's power level seems to be governed by whatever is needed to provide tension. Sometimes he's John Wick, Terminator, Jackie Chan, and sometimes he'll get his shit rocked by just like a really big guy, or someone that is actually a trained fighter. Jack has a fighting style that he frequently likens to improvisational jazz. Get weird, go nuts. They won't know what to do, which is something I would love to see rendered in a film or future video game. His fighting skill is that he doesn't know what the fuck he's doing, and that makes him a threat. And that future video game is in the works as of my writing. A third Shadow Man game starring Jack Boniface was announced for late 2024, which to me reads as early 2026 to never. But I would love to be proven wrong, something I ordinarily hate. This comic was also mildly progressive for its time. Black lead aside, it often took time to condemn racism and religious fundamentalism. There's this sweet interaction where Jack saves an openly gay man from a group of skinheads, and this would-be victim is unbroken by this experience, vowing to go on living his true self, prompting Nettie to call him a brave man. This is part of an arc concerning a guy running for state senate that is elected by, well, being a literal Nazi, courting Nazis, and it's meant to play with the internal moral struggle of Jack. Jack knows this bigot, monster, hate-monger is not breaking any laws or directly killing people, so the lib inside him can't condone killing him. But based Shadow Man would relish snapping this dude's neck. So after accidentally inspiring a homeless man to attempt a political assassination, which he fails, accidentally hitting his opponent, Jack feels compelled to relinquish control of the Shadow Man and peer into the dark possibilities of his power, wrestling with the idea that he can't punch hate in the face. But maybe if he surrendered to the dark wolf within. Oh, I left this part out because it seemed like a needless complication, but at this point in the story, Jack doesn't know that his power is technically being inhibited thanks to a virus he contracted from a changeling spider alien on Dark's payroll. But there's, physical and mental barriers here, is what I'm saying. But if he could, this may have only been the second time that an open Nazi in a red tie amasses a depressingly large and vocal deluded following of disgruntled weirdos who only developed political opinions after seeing gay or brown people happy, and love to point at milquetoast right-of-center policy and call it communism, and then having to watch a guy with the clearest shot you could ever hope for. I found myself enjoying the smaller, situational moments, the pulpier stuff, and the darkly comedic as well. One sequence that I found really amusing was when a mob hitman winds up driving a lead pipe through his chest. Still under the adrenaline-pumping influence of the Shadow Man persona, he shows up at the home of Marcia, who would become his girlfriend, but this is still the night they had met, and he asked for her number, and he's still impaled, and instructs her to pull it out of him, to which she, understandably, offers to call an ambulance instead, but he says, no, I'll heal, I'm a special kind of guy. This will all blow over in the morning. Morning comes, and Jack, now the dominant persona, awakes in terrible screaming agony, baffled that she listened to him and didn't take him to a hospital. When Acclaim bought out Valiant, Jack Boniface, who held the title of Shadow Man for over 40 issues, was replaced. This was, I would say, but not entirely, Acclaim exerting their power over their newly acquired IP, kicking over a sandcastle just for the fuck of it, because a timer was put on the character early on. As early as issue 4, I think, Jack is sort of suddenly and awkwardly pulled into a Valiant Universe crossover event called Unity, bringing him, of course, to some kind of convoluted high sci-fi pocket dimension where time is a flat circle and a bunch of characters from various comics I will never read clash with a militant group defending a character with reality-bending powers named Mother God, herself a villain from a different comic from a different imprint they temporarily held the rights to, Solar, Man of the Atom, that wants to collapse this dimension into Central Standard Time, which will do something bad or good, I don't know really. For a company made out of bitterness directed at Marvel, they sure heartily indulged in the same multiverse wankery. Look, I have my own relationship with comics, okay? I like them. I've wanted to feign familiarity with culturally relevant things, but the compulsion of them to assign secondary homework to understand half of what's going on in one is real annoying. Anyway, it's in this narrative bottleneck that Jack learns he eventually dies a horrific death in the year 1999, and this kind of weighs on him for a number of issues. and eventually instills a maybe false comfort. If he's destined to die in 1999, then in a way, he could do whatever he wants with no fear until then. Although given that the comic has a propensity to launch the guy into different timelines and dimensions, I suppose he could have just next day walked through a portal to 1999 and died there. But the psychology of that is fun to explore. However, as the switch from Valiant to Acclaim was coming, Shadow Man had to end in some sense. Bob Hall, who had taken up writing for the series following the Unity crossover, didn't know if he would be able to return to the character after this merger. So even though that shot was called, it had to maybe end early, and what they came up with is a cliffhanger compromise. Jack is left mid-air, plummeting from a likely fatal fall, while a number of characters and plot elements surround him, any number of which a decent out if you are to continue the story. Nettie's there, his very capable girlfriend is there, Maxim, the previous Shadow Man, is brought to the future, so you could pull we said the Shadow Man was going to die, we didn't specify which one card, and also R.L. McNeely is there, a drifter with the power to bring people's memories to life temporarily. He's technically what's called a Harbinger in Valiant's universe, which is their answer to X-Men, but that's just something you have to say when you're talking about comics on here. So, you know, hey, even if Bob isn't the one to keep the character alive, he's left the next writer with a lot to work with. Many paths to choose. But I don't think he could have foreseen that not only would they not involve Bob, they would reboot the Valiant universe, now the Acclaim universe, which has since been abbreviated as VH2, and his replacement would be Garth Ennis, who had just kicked off his series Preacher, a comic I've many times referred to as my favorite, but I did read it when I was 16, and I don't know if I would trust his recommendations for media, and would make apparent his opinion of the previous incarnation of Shadow Man on the first page of Acclaim's version, immediately revealing that Jack Boniface not only died, but he was impaled on his saxophone, kinda Cannibal Holocaust style. And I'll admit, I wasn't really keeping up with comics in 1996. I was like barely gaining sentience at the time. Though this did unlock a Valiant Comics connection that must have been sealed away in the crossfire of other repressed memories. I used to get old issues of Hard Corps from thrift stores. I dug a couple out of a box. It's a series I never understood, but enjoyed because it was mostly just a bunch of dudes shooting aliens and robots, and thus satiated the juvenile dark passenger within. I now understand it to be a spin-off of Harbinger, concerning an elite squad assembled to fight rogue harbingers, which is somewhat vindicating, as it in some sense proves that there was no hope I ever could have understood its continuity. So I don't have a great way of revisiting the reaction to this. I know that at one point, Shadow Man was a relatively popular, well-liked character. He had fans, but I guess by the time this happened, that had lapsed, and this laughably mean-spirited conclusion didn't cause much of an uproar. Though I could be only having this thought because I've come to associate comic book fans with being easily triggered by change. Later, they would try to amend this and bring the character back as part of a new crossover event called Unity 2000. But by then, Acclaim's bankruptcy was mounting, and this was left unfinished, as they began selling Valiant characters to two entrepreneurs who revived the Valiant imprint under the name Valiant Entertainment. And I'm not going to pretend to understand how this business works. Valiant's going out of business, so two other guys say, we're Valiant now, and then the old Valiant sells their Valiant shit to the new Valiant. Okay. The second run of Shadow Man would be a stark change. Gone are the days of introspective monologues atop rooftops or brooding sax solos in the graveyard. Michael LeRoi, aka Zero, is a gunslinging assassin with no memory of his past. Prior to the start of the video game, Michael is drinking himself to death in a bar with nothing to live for. His only possession, a teddy bear that he spends hours just staring into. One night, Nettie, whose function is pretty much the same, but mission has changed, arrives to collect on the new Shadow Man, having scouted him out for at least a year. This darker world requires a darker hero, one who can kill without dwelling on it too much. We also meet a new character named Jaunty, a dead Irishman who Nettie brought back as a skinless human skull atop a snake's body, though to others he just appears as a very small man. He serves as a link to the biggest deviation, Deadside, a bleak vision of a shared afterlife. In a cruel irony, moments after accepting the job and entering Deadside, his memory is restored, and he realizes who he is and where he came from, just as a voodoo curse deadens his emotions about that. He was a college dropout, working as a taxi driver while perpetuating a lie to his family that he was gainfully employed, putting his degree to use, and was engaged to be married. And he's got the unobtainable PS2 survival horror Holy Trinity in peak condition. He's got everything. He's got the complete package. The teddy bear belonged to his brother Luke, who needed a surgery his family couldn't pay for. One night, one of Mike's customers is abducted by some thugs, leaving behind a briefcase full of money, which he immediately gives to his family. Unfortunately, the thugs track Mike down and beat him up, threatening to kill him if they don't get the money back. A friend convinces him to seek protection from a sort of voodoo loan shark called a Bokor. Mike goes through with a ritual that would protect him from death and attempts to return to life as usual. But the same guys come after him while he's in a car with Luke and his parents. The vehicle careens off a bridge, killing everyone but him, who was magically protected. But it does land him in a coma for months, where he had a connection to Deadside, and Nettie was able to use voodoo to program him to be a killer when he woke up. Nettie is a lot more interesting and morally flexible in this one. She may have treated Jack with kid gloves, but with Mike she's quite upfront about him being used and letting him know who's in charge and how expendable he is. When Michael finds out he was manipulated into being her warrior, he quits, making her return to Jack's grave and raise him as a zombie, telling him the only way he can live is if he gets his power back, which leads to a sort of defining moment, I'd say, in displaying Ennis's writing style. It's saying, if the old run was jazz and ruminations on honor or morality, this one is an ugly and brash subgenre of rock and roll. It's not even going to debase its lead by putting a Mardi Gras mask on him. Instead, it will simply be sewn into his chest. None of this is terribly clear when booting up the game, but it does seem to take only the first 4 or so issues as the jumping off point. I would later confirm this theory after reading the interview in the back of that guide. Phipps almost puts more emphasis on Ashley Wood's art in those first 4 issues as being a bigger draw than its concept. Appropriately, after those is where Ennis's involvement ends, and the vibe of the second run kinda backslides into familiar Valiant schlock. People riding dinosaurs and journeys into other dimensions. You really feel the moment Ennis is no longer there. And it's a bit of a shame because, the video game displays pretty well the wild and imaginative things that could be done with this framework. And even Shadow Man's 4th iteration, post-Acclaim bankruptcy, kept the concept of Deadside as canon. After the second run, there were 2 more Shadow Man series started and not finished. One meant to be a direct continuation to Mike's story, but this time it's clearly informed by the plot of the video game, directly referencing the mechanics of it and enemies featured within. So even though the mainline series had left the idea of Jaunty's true form behind, the game hadn't. So he, as a snake thing, makes a return. It's not one-to-one though. There are new elements like making LeRoi the host of a call-in radio show. The other series was called simply Deadside, an anthology series that explored various figures that find themselves in the titular Deadside. Unfortunately, by the time these 2 were in production, the writing was on the wall for Acclaim, and neither series got to finish their run. So, to sum up, if you weren't aware that Shadow Man was based on a comic book, that's understandable because it's technically based on 4 issues of a short-lived reboot of a character that is mostly thought of as non-canon. And if you did know, why don't you keep that to yourself? I guess reading all that isn't necessary in understanding much of anything about this game. It's still such a strange path that led to it. Acclaim, wanting to cash in on the name of a successful character, but killing that character off and replacing it with a new guy that barely had any time to develop. Like, you had the material to make this a tie-in. Why reset it and base it on a new thing? Oddly enough, I recently bought the trade paperback of issues 5 to 15, and those include a blurb on the front that says, "The comics that inspired the Shadow Man Remastered video game," which is technically not true, and would probably make more sense on the book that collects 1 to 4 and Deadside, because none of this shit's in the game. There isn't a sequence where Mike makes himself a white guy using magic, which weirdly enough, I remember Al Simmons doing as well. What a weird comic book synchronicity, or just a weird thing that white guys writing black characters in the 90s felt compelled to do. The opening of the 1999 Shadow Man game briefly introduces not only a space between the words shadow and man, but their interpretation of Michael LeRoi, heir to an ancient and mysterious lineage that exists to protect the live side from the forces of the dead side. In a joyously pulpy choice, the first cutscene is from the perspective of serial killer Jack the Ripper, writing in his diary. He's looking for an immortal power that he believes is hidden within the souls of his victims, but he hasn't found it yet. So he's thinking about, doing the thing he does to other people on himself, when a mysterious figure referring to himself as Legion enters his subterranean lair. He's putting together a team of like-minded individuals in preparation for a coming apocalypse. Jack's services are needed, particularly his skill as an architect, which I always found to be an odd choice because Jack the Ripper was a real guy, but they never figured out who it was, so it's their idea that he's an architect. But literally at the same time period, I think, there was another real serial killer whose whole fucking thing was that he made a murder building in which to more efficiently murder people. But hey, that's just me, just a regular murder fan over here. Legion wants Jack to help him build a fortress with an engine that will be powered by dark souls, no relation, in order to build an army in Deadside that they can use to invade Liveside. Okay, so you want an engineer serial killer, it sounds like. Can he do that? Does he have that certification? You've given him too many things, including a six-pack. There ain't no testimony calling him Jack the Ripped. Either way, Jack says, "Great plan, I'll be right there." Meanwhile, above the Wild at Heart bar, Nettie wakes up from a prophetic nightmare about the Five, a return of a prophesized great evil that will attempt to use the power of dark souls, no relation, in order to enact the end of all things. Nettie tasks the Shadow Man with collecting these dark souls and using their combined power to defeat Legion and his 5 serial killer champions. Really, the deepest dive we get into the inner workings of Michael LeRoi and his world is summed up in a block of text he speaks before you're handed control of him, proving that, if anything, knowing about the comics just muddles your understanding of this story. You're on a much better footing just knowing his opening words. He vaguely mentions that Nettie is using him, both for her mysterious plans and physically, that his family is dead, and that he has the ability to walk between worlds, and also alludes to being a sort of morally dubious person in life, deserving of his laborious position at the asshole of the universe, as he describes it. I'm interested now. Now I want to know more, which I do. I guess. Yeah, things were a lot more exciting when I didn't know. It was in the next scene that I originally started to wonder if this was based on something. Mike meets Nettie at a church to kick off their quest. She hands him his gun and his bear, which triggers a screaming vision of Luke, Mike's dead brother, prompting an explainer that Mike's strong emotional connection to the bear makes it a sort of link to Liveside, this world. He can use that to return from Deadside at will, which was, I guess you could say, too interesting and thoughtfully considered to have been a game mechanic first. Especially for 1999, I feel like any other comparable game would have just said, whatever, it's not important. The point is it looks cool and you can switch between the two worlds. This does not look like it's attempting to look cool, which is, dare I say, a little cool. It's like edgelord reverse psychology. That guy from the game Loaded knows what I'm talking about. Well, I'm pretty sure Garth Ennis made that guy as well. Also, I'm pretty sure he made Judge Dredd fight a teddy bear at one point. Oh my god. That means nothing. Another fascinating but baffling decision for this game, making it seem like it's overly eager to ascend beyond its console contemporaries, is that Michael's inner monologue is often overtly poetic and pleonastic, just using a deep well of Lovecraftian $10 words to ultimately say in various combinations, "I'm fucking sick."
My hand, the arcing death blow at the end of all things.
Other times, he's a lot more pithy in what he chooses to speak out loud.
Jesus, I don't need this bullshit.
Down in Deadside, Mike meets up with Jaunty, and I will say, after reading the comics, I more so respect how economically they work in exposition. They say a lot with still a lot, but less than you'd reckon they'd need. He points out the newly erected fortress up on the hill and suggests we start looking for Dark Souls there, as it's the only thing that wasn't there earlier. Deadside is appropriately bleak and miserable and unsanitary, with dim fires illuminating primitive catwalks in which all of the world's dead wander and sob aimlessly for all of eternity. And as new areas are unlocked, Mike will ruminate on this horror. It's honestly one of the boldest, darkest concepts included in this game and maybe any other video game. It would be one thing to commit to the author's atheism and omit any reference to some variation of a heaven and a hell, but instead they went with, no, good or bad, when you die you wind up in this horrid purgatory to slowly go insane and join a choir of screaming lost souls with no exception, unless you got 8 balls for eyes. This is it for fucking ever. Or you get gibbed by a guy wearing Windsor frames. Eventually, you'll come across these progress-capped doors, called the Paths of Shadow, that only a Shadow Man can enter. Returning to Nettie and Jaunty provides a nod to the earlier comics in that they were put in place by Mike's predecessor, Maxim St. James. In preparation for this day, he sealed away the means for his replacement to fight the coming evils. Opening the first of these explains the prophecy that Nettie omitted from her instructions. In brief, before the Shadow Man was invented, Legion came to Earth with an army of evil creatures named Immortals. After a long battle, Legion was banished to a place beyond worlds, and the souls of the Immortals were placed into Govi, the basis of the game's collectathon mechanic. For a good while, these souls were protected by the Sisters of Blood until Legion returned, this time creating an army of madmen and killers, constructing an asylum in Deadside. He used these minions to collect the Dark Souls and summon the 5 mortals to be twisted further than they already were, each with their own gateway connecting Deadside to Liveside. It starts to catch up with where we are in the grand scheme of things. Here, a sorceress, Nettie, receives a vision of the apocalypse to come. Then we get called into action. That's us. What if? Jaunty is dubbed the Shadow Man's advisor. The Shadow Man then walks the Shadow Path and then picks up the book and is now reading it. And now he's thinking how weird it is to be reading a book about yourself, reading a book about yourself.
I'm sitting in a laundromat, reading about myself, sitting in a laundromat, reading about myself. My head hurts.
The prophecy continues, spoiling some beats. The Shadow Man is destined to enter the asylum and enter each of the 5 gates to Liveside, defeating each of the 5. Unfortunately, he will fail in this quest, and the world will be plunged into darkness indefinitely. So a little disheartening considering they got so much of the other stuff right. But hey, do the fates know that I'm gonna try really, really hard? There isn't a whole lot of character stuff to expect and cutscenes that aren't about dealing with this prophecy, so if you snip out all the plot, meaning all the bits featuring folks yapping at each other, it amounts to a little over an hour, I'd say, if you include all the optional explainers by checking in with Nettie and Jaunty. And if the game takes, let's say, 25 hours to beat, which is assuming a lot of you. Assuming you have the navigation skills of an eel, and that's good. They're good at that. Look it up, fucker. The story bits make up maybe 5% of the time you'll spend looking at this game. It's an odd approach to storytelling because it does in some sense get doled out linearly, but it's not like you finish the game in blocks or levels where you get to the asylum and then you do the asylum chunk and then you get a shot of dialogue as a reward. It's more like you're constantly bouncing back and forth to different areas as you unlock abilities and tools that can bypass obstacles that you've been catching sight of along the way. And in between all that business, you'll talk with your buddies who in the margins between exposition let slip references to the greater lore. In the opening, Jaunty throws out a one-sentence dig at Michael for sleeping with Nettie, so she'll stay young. And I did find myself scratching my head and saying, huh? Prior to reading the comics. Sure enough, it is established in the series that any moment Michael spends not f***ing Nettie is time that she begins to rapidly age. And yet again, I'm left scratching my head with a huh? The asylum is a labyrinth of grimy, rusted metal plates, whirring machinery with steam billowing from pipes and heaps upon heaps of dead people discarded in piles like whatever bodily shavings go into hot dogs. In a series of labs, the empty meat suits meant to one day become Legion's army can be found, mostly disassembled, but some already having their dark souls. All this is powered by a great big engine that needs destroying, but like most things in the game, it can't be done all at once. Mike has to one by one deactivate each piston, while the bloody-mouthed apparition of Luke eggs him on, pleading for him to save him, which Mike seems to fall for, even though you'd think he'd know how Deadside works given he's the lord of it and all. Maybe after eating all these worms, they've entered his brain. Nettie, you've got to get rid of your cell phone. The Wi-Fi radiation will damage the mitochondria of the brain. The bodies of the five have been ritualistically slaughtered, left in a place between living and death, not belonging to either side really. I think this entire concept was the result of a one-off idea in Garth Ennis's issues of Shadow Man. A comparatively brief plot point concerns a gang of dead men led by a guy named Tommy Lee Bones escaping Deadside. This also included a guy named 8-Ball, whose whole thing was that his eyes had been replaced by billiard balls, yet still functioned as eyes. So when Mike predictably knocks one out of his head, he has to scramble around looking for it. Not explained or expanded on, and you know what? I don't think it should have been.
Well, there was that little incident with Tommy Lee's undead gang a while back. Seemed like an aberration at the time, but thinking about it, could have been a trial run.
It's a testament to how good Ennis is at writing memorable villains that I really hoped Tommy Lee's gang wound up in the game, even as just a contrived boss fight or something. And I think that may have been the intention at some point in development because you can see them depicted in early concept art. I'm just a fan of like overzealous low-level fuckers, goons and underlings that exist in a story entirely out of their own self-interest. If you'd like to experience the rest of this game on your own, feel free to skip to this time, where I will briefly summarize my feelings on the game's plot in a general sense. If you don't foresee yourself wanting that, then proceed at your own risk.
What are you watching now?
Shadow Man. Oh shit, watch out, Shadow Man! Oh, okay, something unpredictable about this movie's action.
Since Steven Seagal is on screen, I'm assuming this is again not based on the Shadow Man video game.
I mean, I guess. What is he gonna shoot that guy from all the way over here? Oh shit! He's just there! Maybe he is the Shadow Man.
Why don't you just Google if there was ever a film based on Shadow Man?
Yeah, why don't you Google it?
There was not.
Okay, cool. What do you want, my job now? Maybe go find a ghost or do something that I programmed you to do.
Okay.
Alright. You're familiar with the MK Ultra program, right?
How is this about MK Ultra?
It's a virus. It causes the exposed to come down with various types of cancer, influenza, you name it.
Oh, okay. They don't know what that was. That makes writing about it freeing, I guess. As you explore new areas of the asylum and of Deadside at large, you'll slowly grow in power and ability, and one by one enter each of the 5 gateways to Liveside. But first, there is a complication with Shadowman's comic and game lore that needs to be addressed before we can go down that road. The gateways transport Mike to Liveside, where it's always daylight in each time zone, and thus he can't indulge in the Shadowman abilities as he could in Deadside. But also, time moves differently in Deadside, so it's not like he can just appear in Florida and then nap until it's nighttime. By then, who knows how much time may have passed down there. He could show up and find they've entered a morbid, fleshy nuclear age. The fix for this was left behind by Maxim St. James and requires the assembly of a magic dagger called L'Eclipser that Nettie uses in a ritual to force a solar eclipse Liveside and hold it in place until the Shadowman can finish his quest. Oh yeah, I forgot that's what happens for real in the game. It's weird. It's a weird thing that only special copies of the game get. I heard that most versions don't get the special double Nettie cuts. While this does give Mike a significant advantage in going against the 5, it concerningly plays into the prophecy. Nettie, the sorceress, has her power exhausted, left in a trance as the world is shrouded in darkness. At this point, Mike starts saying the thing I'm thinking. Hang on, it seems like in trying to stop the prophecy from happening, I keep making it happen. It's almost like whoever wrote this prophecy, whatever that means, like predicted what would happen using some kind of foresight. The thing about this stretch of the game is, for me at least, once you've played Night Dive's remastered version of Shadowman, it's hard not to see the original versions as a compromise, even though that interview in the guidebook says otherwise. And I mean, why would they express that they were rushed or burnt out to an acclaimed marketing guy? They'd probably sense wavering loyalty and sniff them out as a potential dissenter. Either way, you have a better sense of what was uneven or missing once you've seen it there. Like, yeah, why wouldn't each of the 5 get their own level to wander around and eventually fight them at the end of? In the older versions, there were only 2 of them that got their own level, and the other 3 were conveniently arrested by the FBI and held in the same prison level. Like, if it were the case that 3 of the 5 were incarcerated, it seems like the plans had some hiccups beyond Shadowman getting involved. Yeah, I don't know Legion's thoughts on this, but seems like he should be looking for serial killers that don't get caught. Milton Pike is an ex-military, conspiracy theorist, survivalist, weirdo type serial killer. Rambo with a Gadsden flag and truck nuts. He's got that personality type that's so old school racist, he doesn't even have to use slurs anymore. It's just emanating from him like an aura.
You trespassing on my property, I can call you anything I choose, boy.
I can't be certain, but I think they had this fight reflect the sort of dumb tough guy archetype he embodies. All of the other serial killers are essentially demons in meat suits and thus can teleport around or climb on walls and shit, but Milton is the only one that pretty much stays put and just eats bullets until he falls over.
Consider that a dishonorable discharge, boy.
Marco Cruz is a disco-obsessed serial killer who disguises himself as a repo man. Truth be told, this guy feels like a reference to something that's going over my head, like some grindhouse slasher movie character that doesn't seem to take the goal of overthrowing humanity all that seriously. I couldn't place like a specific film or TV show that this guy was supposed to be mirroring, but there's a good case to be made that he was modeled after a real-life serial killer that was active during the making of the video game, who did do the things ascribed to this character almost identically. So it's plausible that it was narratively modeled after that guy, not physically. If it was, Marco would look like the Dean from Community.
Look at his shadow!
Both he and Milton are the characters that did not previously get their own dedicated levels, which are a scrapyard in the Mojave Desert and an abandoned camp in Florida, respectively, and really a fun change of pace from the others. Avery Marks is known live-side as the home improvement killer. He cuts off the power to his victims' homes and stalks them in the dark using a pair of night vision goggles. He's also maybe the most abrasive of the 5, having a whiny voice and taunting you with deranged baby speak.
Come to mama now, baby.
Strangely, his level is kind of an H.H. Holmes-like murder hotel where you find yourself running across the various remains of his victims. So even with a guy on the squad who's like probably skilled in some trade other than murder, like carpentry or construction, they still wanted Jack to be the architect of the asylum. Jack the Ripper's gateway transports you to the sewer we see in the game's first cutscene, which actually sits beneath an abandoned subway station. If you want, you can pore over some of the concept art, repurposed as in-world documents that outline Jack's design for the asylum, which apparently consisted of just drawing Peter Bruegel's Tower of Babel and then marking where a chimney might go. This level and Avery's, I'd say, are the most visually interesting and the most disgusting and disorienting. Apparently, the dev team used an actual abandoned subway tunnel as reference for this, and it shows. There's something unnerving about it. It's like you're stuck in a limbo, cut off from normal society just above you. You can even catch glimpses of an operational subway speeding by full of passengers, oblivious that just a layer of crumbling brick away, the Lord of Deadside does battle with an industrial age serial killer and an army of possessed Rottweilers, which are actually demons, so just keep telling yourself that. Victor Petrakian is a Swiss forensic psychologist, leader of the Five, and self-proclaimed Lizard King killer. Visually, he is just Anthony Hopkins' portrayal of Hannibal Lecter, now the lone member of the Five in the Gardell County Jail. He's also known as Dr. Death. He kind of has too many things. Even with a handful of unfinished content restored, there is still no real explanation why he apparently has both the ability to burst people's heads and then resurrect them to do his bidding. The other guys are able to perform unnatural feats of strength and acrobatics, also absorb hundreds of bullets. But this seems like the sort of thing that should have been in that dossier. You know, asterisk, by the way, he does that. He does that now? Michael's confrontation with Victor is probably my favorite scene in the whole game. Not only does the Shadow Man seem uncharacteristically confident in this fight, enough to dress Victor down like a school bully, he continues to periodically shoot at him during his obligatory monologue. He's desperately trying to skip the cutscene for you. With the Dark Engine's pistons all shut down, Michael is able to cross through the machinery and chase after what he thinks is Luke. He finally catches up with him in a throne room of sorts, unwilling to examine how strange this scenario is due to his overwhelming guilt. Michael apologizes to Luke and gives him the teddy bear, his link to live side. Done twisting his dagger, Legion reveals himself and gleefully takes credit for everything that led the Shadow Man here. There never was a prophecy. Well, there was, but it was just manufactured by this guy. Being immortal, he planted the seeds of this cunning plan long ago, and over the course of a millennia, the best thing he could come up with was, I guess, gather a bunch of ding-dongs and turn them into doors and then trick his enemy's champion into hoovering up a bunch of worms that he'll put into a giant meat golem assembled by pigmen, question mark, controlling the universe.
To hell with this obscure shit.
After fighting Legion in many forms, Michael essentially holds his mouth open and pours all the Dark Souls into him. The Shadow Man emerges from the destruction more emboldened than ever to take up the mantle of Lord of Deadside. I think the only flaw in this very, very, very long con is that, well, at the end of it, he does have to fight a Shadow Man that is so full of Dark Souls, his eyes are purple. The Dark Souls are piss in this scenario.
And I've got a surprise ending for you.
In that strategy guide interview with Phipps and Miller, Phipps talks a bit about the writing process for Shadow Man, and he brings up the work of Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey format, which, if you don't know, is a sort of crutch, as I see it, among authors that I've not really understood. But hey, the thing I do is more or less, stream of consciousness word salad. They were interested in the idea of taking the Shadow Man figure, who is, if anything, really cool, and sculpting an epic myth around him based on this archetypal idea that a guy thought of one time. I sense this muddling the parts of the story I do like. I feel like when I'm consuming a piece of media, I pick up on and fixate on ideas. It has a lot of those. The backstory, the attitude, the world, the design choices are all really inventive and unique, and they remind me of my own thinking when I attempt some creative endeavor, in that I also like to just steal things and change one or two details. The game does this while opting to lampshade this process. Hey, isn't this kind of like that? Yeah, I guess, but here's something different about it. I would not be compelled to do such a thing. See, I took that. It's mine now. I find myself wishing I could peer beyond the frame of cutscenes, poke around in the margins, in doors that are locked or nailed shut or marked restroom. So why you'd want that watered down to fit some kind of narrative checklist is beyond me. There's a polarization between these grim, dark, comedic, rule of cool concepts that I do like, and these sort of obligatory story beats that just kind of feel like they're happening because they're expected to happen. The framing of this being a prophecy, that doesn't help much either. They kind of tell you how it's going to play out from the start. It all sounds so neat and orderly when you cut out all the hours spent wandering a disorienting network of rusty metal tunnels, praying for something to save you, looking at this book again and fighting with it, refusing to accept that it was made for an older version of the game, resurfacing all the times I tried to skate through a college course without paying for the book, thinking an older edition is good enough until the professor references a chapter that simply does not exist. For all the good the remastered version brings, it does bring with it something I'm undecided on. Length, which for me results in time spent lost. Time spent with only the grunts and canned phrases of Michael LeRoi to keep me company. I had a lot of time to think that Nettie and Jaunty are fun characters that are kind of underutilized, because most of their dialogue is optional or missable, and all they really do is offer up explainers or hints worded differently. Michael will come across like a locked door, so you Teddy warp back to Nettie, who's like, "What?" Oh, I can't do that voice. She says, "You need the sacred MacGuffin, Shadow Man. Quit wasting time." And then you Teddy warp to Jaunty, who says the same thing, obfuscated by barely coherent Irishisms. I don't know, give me one more source of plot. Have them speak to me psychically, audio logs, letters between characters, unlocked memories. Fill this void that I created with my own dogshit memory and sense of direction. But hey, setting aside one's oddly specific nitpicks with a piece of content, I like what this game set out to do. Not only is it ambitious in scale, it's ambitiously weird, campy, and morbid, even more so than its source material, I'd say. There's a lot of absolutely fucked up visuals and concepts not put under a microscope, but suggested through environments, decoration, and even music. The most upsetting and unnerving things about this game are mostly irrelevant to the whole collecting Dark Souls to prevent an apocalypse quest. I don't even mean to imply they aimed for something as advanced as environmental storytelling. I just mean they understood the objective. If half of your time playing this game is going to be spent in this medieval meets industrial murder factory in the shared purgatory that awaits us all, it's going to be disgusting. There's gonna be a manskin rug. It's inevitable. And you can draw from this what you will, but I like that type of she. You want to cancel me? Kick me out of the Video Gamers Association of America? Revoke my seat on the council? I'd like to see you try. I've got dirt on every last one of you. You think I'm crazy now? Guy Miller likes to think the objective of Shadow Man was to push video games out of the nursery, not meaning it bested its contemporaries by placing more piles of corpses or puddles of blood in its levels, which a case could of course be made for, but that it managed to integrate a mature storyline full of poetic language and pop culture references for adults on consoles so that me, a 10-year-old, could convince my mother to buy it for me. And she don't know what a fucking video game is. Even with the abundance of modern, hyper-specific genre tags, Shadow Man is a unique mixture of elements that eludes a simple explanation. It attempts many modes of gameplay, platforming, shooting, puzzles, but I think moment to moment what you'll be doing is exploring and collecting. Truly, it may have more in common with its contemporary Donkey Kong 64 than Soul Reaver. I mean, it's built into the plot that you're supposed to collect Dark Souls, each one making you a fraction of a percent stronger. I really didn't have a great grasp of how much power you gain until I went back and tried playing through the Dreamcast version and found myself getting my ass kicked by early enemies. Wait a second. It used to take far less soul bullets before enemies begin their extended death animation. They really make a meal out of it, writhing around and screaming, convulsing. It's almost like they don't want to die. The Dark Souls also allow you to open doorways in the path of shadows that have higher Dark Soul requirements as they go. Now, I'm not clever for invoking the term Metroidvania when talking about Shadow Man, but I will concede I said it more disingenuously than others may have. But sure, it's doing that thing where there is an interconnected map that expands and wraps around as you unlock certain abilities and items. I'm sure there's a more modern comparison I could make, but you know, I'm too petty to do that.
Dark Souls.
Fuck! There is an explorative joy I often tapped into, especially during the live side segments. It's almost like there was less to do, but they were more unpredictable. As cool as Deadside and the Asylum is, I'm pretty sure the next area I unlock is going to be some kind of horrific mechanized abattoir, and that's cool, but sometimes it's cool to see like an old-timey saloon, or a mystical cave system, or a tube station pisser. Unfortunately, my least favorite urinal configuration. No cover or splash shielding from any angle. Full 360 vulnerability, open to attack from all vectors. Even when you're not collecting Dark Souls, you'll be collecting little hearts that can eventually be traded for an upgrade to your life bar. This felt surprisingly natural. The amount of times I saw a heart perched annoyingly on a ledge overlooking a chasm and thought, I don't fucking care, was a lot fewer than I expected. The remaster brings with it several quality of life improvements and modernizations, such as a quick radial inventory, and most importantly, it tells you how many Dark Souls you could potentially collect at your current power level in any given room, adding much needed direction where there once was none. A small but game-changing adjustment. Literally, it changed the game. It changed part of the game. Is this something? I don't think so. I feel like I wrote that as a joke, but then I didn't read it as one. It's a game changer. It literally changed the game. I know, that's nothing. I was on so much NyQuil when I wrote this. This is terrible. Booting up any version of the original, I would say it does show and feel its age. But then if you take a look at a prototype of the game that's floating around on the internet, you can see how much even that was a monumental improvement over the course of a single year. And the new version of Shadow Man smears that line and leaves the game in an uncanny place between timelines. Too slick and crisp to feel like an emulation, but its console-centric roots are hard to ignore. A new body with old bones, eerie and beautiful all at once. It's another reason why this feels like the definitive way to experience this game now. It does a much better job easing new players into this old experience, throwing a sheet over its clunkiness and setting flower pots on bare tables. Yet still, and I don't mean to harp on this point, I do long for a map. If there's one thing I greatly appreciate about the two franchises that make up the portmanteau that is Metroidvania, it's the inclusion of a detailed and helpful map. And you know what? I'll admit, oftentimes it's not even because of the utility of it. It's just I like looking at it. I appreciate the artistry, is what I'm saying. In interviews, they mentioned the difficulty of planning out the levels, especially since they had to draw them out by hand in 3 dimensions to make any sense of them. So they existed, yet they hoard this knowledge to themselves. Alright, I lied. There is a map, but hang on. Stop yelling at me. It's not like a Castlevania map or even a Silent Hill map that fills out as you explore or takes note of blocked passages and whatnot. It's a JPEG in your files that depicts the world as though it were a child's board game. It looks like fucking Candyland. It's actually quite useless. Hyperbole aside, I really enjoyed revisiting Shadow Man and sunk about 26 hours into playing just the remaster, and not all of that against my will. Iguana's stab at maturity wasn't confined to violence and profanity and nudity. An earnest attempt was made to give you an adult's autonomy. It has faith that you'll find the way, a faith I often proved misplaced. Anytime I got close to bailing or taking a break, something fascinating would happen, and I'd begrudgingly say, alright, one more hour. Combat isn't the game's strong suit, and especially considering we are playing as a self-proclaimed god, I can't say I ever never felt like one. There's a decent variety of weapons and you're allowed to equip one in each hand, but I never felt compelled to use many of them. In Deadside, I mostly stuck with the standard shadow gun and assault, a skull that throws fireballs, but even then I mostly used it as a torch in dark areas, and only accidentally used it as a weapon when panicked. Pretty much all weapons, magical and terrestrial, have the impact of a wet noodle on my enemies, and require you to hold down the trigger until the numbers know they're no more. Even with these gripes, there were plenty of moments where I'd suddenly realize the absurdity of a scenario and find myself giggling. Being given the opportunity to empty an Uzi into a sword-wielding Jack the Ripper, the real guy, was unlike anything I'd done before. The only time I felt like I was dominating was when I unlocked the optional second Violator, which originally wasn't even featured in the game save for the N64 version, so I'm essentially cheating. There's no honor in this, no glory. Oh right, I don't care. It has its difficulty spikes, but they feel more valid now. In the original, I'd greet many deaths with some variation of, what? And with this version, I'm more likely to say, damn my wretched hands, curse my clumsy oafish grasp. There isn't really a penalty to death beyond placing you back at the start of a level, which can be a bit demoralizing, especially if it already took you ages to find the pit of lava you fell into. Then eventually you become impervious to lava and begin to see death for the blessing it was, as you shamefully wade back to dry, non-molten land. I get the sense that there may be a generational divide when it comes to this game. I can, and I don't want to use this phrase, but look past a lot. But more so, I feel comfortable around older game design. I'm less likely to bounce off it because I was there. I watched video games sprout tiny vestigial nubs that would one day birth joints. I can't confidently say, yeah, you'll just get this, you'll immediately vibe with it, but such a weirdo niche concept requires a specific weirdo to appreciate the parts that work and the numerous parts that don't. And that could be you. You too could have taste. You gotta work at it though. Refine your palate. You think I started out having all the right opinions? No. You think they just hand out a membership at the Video Gamers Association of America? Well, yes, they do after you've made a blood sacrifice and then, huh?
How you feeling?
How we feeling? I'll be honest, I'm feeling a little fatigued. Feeling a little fatigued. We came in here, champs. We came in here. High energy. High energy. But I'm telling you, man, I'm just feeling fatigued. Right? Feeling a little burnt out. Yeah, but I appreciate you guys showing up. I appreciate you guys showing up. I think it's obvious that the entire impetus for the creation of a Shadow Man video game was that the first 4 issues of its second run were visually interesting, and I think Iguana did their best with the technology available to make their adaptation as grimy, gross, and packed with eye-catching visuals as possible. And if anything, now that I can see the game in 4K and some of its censorship has been undone, I still frequently find myself mouthing, "What the f***?" At the sight of such arresting scenes, such as a gimp-suited man Frankensteined into the shape of a dog, or these doors that look like... I can show that, right? It's simply a portal in which one can enter, you know? After you've prepared and worked your way up to Shadow Man's shape. Though it's a big game, with big areas and a big amount of areas, and easy to get turned around in, so there will be moments where you notice a lot of it can be a bit samey. I wouldn't think too hard about what the function of many of these rooms with not much in them but like a pile of bones, served. I think that's why something I honed in on was that I liked the idea of the 5. The idea of there being a set number of bosses, each with their own personalized level that you slowly unlock access to, is sort of like a survival horror Mega Man scenario. It shakes up the occasional monotony of Deadside and the Asylum. I like the theming of it all and how the cathedral that splits into each of their levels operates kind of like the holiday forest in Nightmare Before Before Christmas. When I was a kid, I always assumed they'd make sequels where Jack goes into one of the other doors and becomes equally infatuated with like St. Patrick's Day or some shit. Even then, I was like, let's talk IP. We need a game plan for future entries. What's that? We just sell merchandise through Hot Topic in perpetuity? Alright, seems like a waste of potential, but you gotta work for it. But there are certainly areas that stand out, looking so surreal or creative that I can envision the concept art that led to them. Like this massive spinning centrifuge in the experimentation part of the asylum. Just a giant cylinder spewing molten metal that you have to climb a rope through the center of. This strange red neon prison chapel populated by headless prison guards. Truly, there are chapels everywhere for those with the eyes to see. Comparing scenes from original to remaster is kind of an astounding night and day difference.
Seems like simply ages since I last set my eyes on your happy smiling mug.
Your feelings mutual.
Seems like simply ages since I last set my eyes on your happy smiling mug.
Your feelings mutual.
Seems like simply ages since I last set my eyes on your happy smiling mug.
Your feelings mutual.
Seems like simply ages since I last set my eyes on your happy smiling mug.
Your feelings mutual.
Seems like simply ages since I last set my eyes on your happy smiling mug.
Your feelings mutual.
I can more fully appreciate things that my brain had registered as mud before. Like its dramatic lighting, the rippling of blood pools, the apocalyptic deadside skies. But even more granular details like these big floodgates in a pool of blood. Once raised, you can see this sort of gradient brown and red staining. It's that kind of thoughtful and psychotic consideration that sticks with me. Someone had to say, wait, this ain't right. The blood would stain. It always does. It stains your clothes. It stains your soul. And when you get up there, when you meet St. Peter at the gate and casts his gaze down on you, say you're filthy. The restored content also highlights the wild scaling with things like this helicopter model. Since you originally only saw it flying in the prison level, you could headcanon that they were attempting like a forced perspective thing, but actually,
It's just really small.
a lot of grief was given to the PlayStation version of Shadow Man, and having now played some of it, I can confirm that had this been the version I first played, I would have been incensed. It's pretty obvious immediately that it just can't exist within these parameters. Its frame rate, stuttering, unable to even load Michael's cool glasses, and without those, you really gain an understanding of how key they are to his wardrobe. Without them, he's just like a lean Hans Moleman. Another omission making this version inferior, nay unplayable figuratively, is that it lacks a certain, shall we say, group of small guys. Well, you've got me, I can't fool you. Obviously, it's time for the Rat Roundup! Now, I can't tell you that Shadow Man is a shining, skittering beacon of rat representation. They are not a mainstay of every one of this game's MC Escher designing the Winchester House nightmarescapes. But what I can offer you is a dense slice of rat. Jack the Ripper's level starts you off in a sewer, often the spawn point for the little guys. And sure enough, you'll find plenty of blocky, low-poly rodents zipping around the walkways at unprecedented speeds. Get a few of them cornered and they'll create mesmerizing patterns with their nimble-footed sprinting. Thankfully, unlike the game's dogs, the rats are neutral, non-hostile entities, simply going about their humble, frenetic scurrying. They have no quarrel with you, good sir. Oh, they are not confined to the damp, fetid sewers of, at the time of my writing, not so jolly old London. They can venture out beyond into the empty, crumbling subway station above. But no further! It's a lively but short-lived soiree of twitching whiskers and boggling eyes, presumably, were we so lucky to make out such details. All in all, I'd have to give these rats my highest Rat Roundup rating. Good. Shadow Man's, the game's, characters call for a lot of big scenery-chewing voice performances. Every character is like a cartoon persona, cranked up until the knob's broken off.
Yo, soul brother, shall we dance?
So it's sort of admirable that not all but many of them are performed by the fellers making the game and not professional voice actors. I mean, you can tell But it's the attempt that's admirable, because quality aside, I'd say just about everyone's voice is memorable, if anything. Simon Phipps essays the role of Jack the Ripper, which is perfectly serviceable. He sounds like, a guy shoved on stage in the middle of a theatrical performance and doing a damn fine job despite still needing to glance at his balled-up script.
Ha! Dying is easy. I have achieved that end more than once in my existence.
Nettie is voiced by Lonnie Minella, who is one of few actual career video game voice actors on the call sheet. She's Nancy Drew and Rouge the Bat, for Christ's sake. But as far as her performance in this game, it's a little much. Doesn't strike me as something that was, let's say, in her wheelhouse.
They are the heralds for the apocalypse, opening the way for the armies of the damned.
Two of the five, Marco and Milton, are voiced by a New Orleans-born character actor named Corey Johnson, which perhaps suggests some attempt to evoke the roots of the setting. And both those characters are fun, but neither reflect the particular accent one would expect from the area.
You gonna find out what survival is all about. Just like a rerun of the Nam.
So I guess that could be a coincidence, but then why get this guy for that? Like, doesn't everybody have one of these in the back pocket? The true wild card of this cast is the voice of the titular Shadow Man, which is honestly flawless. Perfectly sounds like a guy who used to be a guy but is now a god, and it's quickly gone to his head.
Do you know who I am? Do you?
You're a little puppy dog.
Don't call me that!
His voice is performed by a man named legally Red Pepper.
I do a lot of video games as well, and a lot of them are sound effects of ghouls in the background.
Someone you're more likely to know if you're from the UK, as his voice has appeared in countless movie trailers.
Mr. Bean's Holiday.
I think he's shown up on panel shows like Big Fat Quiz of the Year. But it's actually quite impressive how much he simply sounds like this. Yeah, this guy, this f***ing freak actually laughs like this. If his Michael LeRoi is him putting on a character, it's only requiring the most gentle tweak in tone. There's this fun story he's told a few times in different interviews about how he got his start. He was approached by a TV executive while he was working as a conductor on the London Underground, where he would occasionally fuck with the passengers while he was bored.
Every now and then I'd do something silly like turn the lights off on the train and this is your driver speaking, or is it?
Speaking of trailers, I'd wager there's a decent number of similarly aged gamers that never played Shadow Man, but knew it from this fucking incredible but terrifying trailer that played when you booted up one of the demo discs from official PlayStation Magazine. And I wish I knew more about it because it looks as if they brought some Dave McKean art to life. Also, even in this trailer, there's a split-second shot of 8-Ball. The world, i.e. me and two other people, wants this guy to exist in video game form. One of the most iconic aspects of this game is its soundtrack and sound design, both created by composer Tim Haywood. It's an eclectic and weird soundtrack that, much like the rest of the game, defies easy explanation. It's kind of like Nurse with Wound meets Aphex Twin meets a Halloween sound effects tape. Haywood was apparently pretty instrumental in getting the game remastered and supplying the source code for the version it was built on. He contributed heavily to a Shadow Man fan club that existed in the long absence between Shadow Man news, and despite working on multiple other projects in the interim, held up his work on this game as his favorite project. Because the remastered version required assembling incomplete levels and scenes, he jumped at the opportunity to revise and add to his work on Shadow Man. There's a lot of music in this thing, so much so that even though I was frequently lost and made to listen to the same tracks over and over, it somehow kept surprising me. It would come in waves where some amalgamation of industrial clunks and groans would coalesce into a makeshift beat, and I'd suddenly wonder if I'd ever heard that part of the track before. There's multiple tracks in this game that are good and listenable outside the context of playing the game. However, I do also greatly respect the decision to make some of them deeply unpleasant to listen to in any context. Expertly and appropriately awful. For instance, there's a track that plays in the playroom area of the asylum that doesn't really have like a song structure. It's like a sound collage of power drills, screams, squeaky toys, children crying, and that sort of horrid squelching you'd hear if you like put a mic to someone squeezing raw chicken or something. It's absolutely the worst, but impressively so. But of course there are numerous tracks that also go so much fucking harder than they have any right to. The Fogometers level has this wonderful bit where a thumping rhythm is created with the sound of machine implements and pistons knocking about. I could just put that on a loop forever. He also has this tendency to work the game's dialogue into tracks as drops, and I can't say I've heard another game do that before. It's one of many things that expresses the strange, amorphous creativity that went into this. You get the impression that this sort of dark, ambient, industrial, and drone sound is the space of creation that he favors. This is his zone. I'm guessing this because he sort of just literally kept making music for Shadow Man games that didn't exist on Bandcamp, evolving further the atmosphere present in the game, featuring similar forays into noise, sampling, and spoken word, some of which found their way into the remaster. And it's honestly great, and he deserves more horror game work, although I can only imagine Bloons TD is a safer bet these days. There literally just was a horror game set in Louisiana with a cool soundtrack that immediately had their team fucking deleted for not making number go up enough, and this fills me with an apprehensive fear for the proposed return of Shadow Man in Dark Legacy. There's just too many dreamers out there in this world of nightmares. I really wanted to like this game, but unless you use a guide or played it back in the day and were willing to just meaninglessly wander, you have no idea where to go or what to do. It's been lovingly restored, but that doesn't matter if you don't have any idea how to progress. So I should come clean. I do think level design can be confusing. You can get lost and have difficulty finding your objective. That is totally true. But also, I was playing that up a bit, and the remaster now thoughtfully highlights areas where something can be done, such as a dark soul you are able to collect or a weapon you're able to unlock. This in some sense does give you plenty idea of how to progress. Now, it's not going to set a waypoint or something, but though I did find myself wandering, it was never meaninglessly. I always knew what I was looking for, and I did come across many reviews that cite this as a hard barrier for them. And it could be they didn't notice, or even with that, they have some other life-wasting activity that takes precedence, I guess. A legendary game, and should be properly played on its native consoles. The mapping for the controls here, while workable, will leave your intricate jumping moments and timed ledge grabs feeling something like a nightmare. It doesn't carry over too well to PC. Shadow Man is an otherwise great game, and I have nothing bad to say about it. Leave this one for a PS2 play. Firstly, it was never on the PS2, so that would in fact not be its native console. Maybe you're confusing your memory of it with its sequel, but I can look past that. The central premise here is kind of absurd though, because the controls aren't workable. Like, they are so streamlined and smooth that it's indistinguishable from a modern third-person game. What are these intricate jumps you're making? Maybe try jumping normally. Classic is a classic for a reason. Judging from other reviews and my experience of this, if you're not full of fond, nostalgic memories of this game, it is probably not for you. Weird jiggling animations, sudden death, and rewind to distant waypoints if you touch certain types of material. Long, winding, all-alike 3D passageways with no map. Great voice acting on a badly timed script. It's got all the gameplay and graphic features of a game from 1990 that didn't get finished properly and wasn't a great design in the first place. Yeah, so all this is like dumb and wrong, but I just want to say, it's not that you die if you touch certain types of material. It's lava, which I think is pretty universal in game design, right? It harkens back to an ancient place, a world of childhood fantasy. We all know when the floor is lava, you don't touch the lava or you lose. In this case, the fail state of that is death, which might also be the case in the real world we live in. So Yeah, I felt that was a necessary clarification. It's not just any old material, it's the same flesh-melting material from our world. Loved this game when it come out, and what I would say is simple should have stayed in the past and left alone. Yes, you improved the gameplay, but for PC users, you are going to die loads of times on simple moments, so as I am a PC user, it's a large no way would I buy this game again. But too late, I have, but hope that this comment stops others making the mistake I have. Just remember the game as it was and leave it at that. As I am a PC user, it's a large no way would I buy this game again, but too late, I have. the most incomprehensible take. Love this game. Yes, you've improved it, but you shouldn't have. And for whatever reason, the platform that offers the most accessibility and customizability and widest array of ways in which to play it is the one where you're going to die a lot. Let me start off by saying I love Night Dive Studios. Their history as a company that brings back older titles into modern glory has been nothing short of amazing, and I will continue to support them for as long as I'm alive. However, Shadow Man is not a game that was worth remastering, and I can guarantee it was a financial bomb for them. The problem lies with the internet, which glorifies this game to be something other than a total stinker. So Night Dive foolishly worked on this, a game which most people were content to talk about, not play. The writing sucks, the voice acting sucks, and the level design is so bad it makes you want to drive a stake through your heart. This game tries to combine a lot of mystical garbage and to be dark about it, but the plot is convoluted and useless, just like the level design. It just comes off as a mediocre project written by a middle schooler and bankrolled into production by his rich father. I don't recommend this game to people who value good storytelling, or to people who want to have fun while playing games. Shadow Man wasn't popular back in the day, and it's not popular now, outside of obscure discussions and fake YouTube personalities, hyping this game up to be something it's not, and could never be. Better luck next time, Night Dive. Love you anyway, and hope you make smarter decisions on what to work on next. Okay, first of all, fuck you. How's this for real? Real enough for you? How about I crank it up a notch to the Su-Fi?
Whoa! Can you do that? What is that?
It's the signature move of arena comedian Dane Cook.
Who?
Oh my god, look, several years ago when you were allowed to be funny, there was this guy that wasn't funny anyway. I appreciate the caveat that Night Dive does good work, but who are you to decide what is worth remastering? What are you, their accountant? You're saying this because you don't like it. You're not tapped into some objective truth that a shadowy cabal of YouTubers are trying to cover up. There's a world outside of your field of vision. Not everyone is as internet brain rotted as you. I'd imagine it's a game that simply appealed to creative types, people with a niche but passionate interest, and I don't know, maybe ones who dropped out of film school and then tried this out and said, yeah, close enough. The plot is actually not convoluted at all. It's actually like the most simplistic part of the game. You're a voodoo-powered superhero that needs to foil a demon guy's plan to build a demon army and conquer the world. There's like fluff around it, but it's as you said, as though a middle schooler wrote it. This is kids playing with action figures. You don't get that? That's convoluted to you? Maybe examine that. It's also not like a thing that solely exists in these obscure gamer circles. A few weeks ago, I randomly walked into a comic book store and saw a new Shadow Man TPB prominently displayed. It's a still running comic book series that has carried on aspects of the video game, and they're also making another video game. But sure, dude, I guess I'm contributing to an obscure discussion. Shadow Man is an interesting addition to the games Night Dive has endeavored to clean up and put back on the shelf. They often choose games that have fallen between margins or faded from memory, whether through a stroke of rotten luck or because they simply didn't find an audience. And if one truly seeks to preserve video games, naturally that would include these misfits and misfires. What's weird to me is that Shadow Man wasn't some kind of flop. It wasn't stranded on one console or unobtainable due to the infuriating vagaries of the retro game market. Its handler simply went bankrupt, and if I could offer a guess, too much time passed, the horror video game landscape rapidly changed, it grew darker and more self-serious, making the overt camp and comic book absurdity of Shadow Man accelerate the clip at which it aged, and nobody dared pick up the torch, or the torch was lost in an attic and there was some kind of dispute about who actually owned the torch last and who would receive monetary compensation if one were to offer to pick up the torch. How much is the torch worth to you? Do you think you could make your money back on the torch? It's a story that is somewhere beneath all of the wild ideas and odd shit, a pretty straightforward hero myth, and you often forget that, not only because the breaks between plot cutscenes can be hours, but because it takes every opportunity to paint over its video gamey elements with whimsical lore concerning trauma, death, or madness. You think this is just a fast travel mechanic? Actually, it's a sort of psychological totem, a representation of Michael's guilt and failure to protect his family that serves as his link to humanity, literally and figuratively. You think Michael's got a funny little mask on his chest because he's a superhero good guy? Actually, it's a physical mask woven into his ribs, unlike his predecessor who could choose when to don the identity of the Shadow Man. Michael is inseparably chained to it, blurring whether he's controlling this dark power or is enslaved by it. And then, you know, he fights a disco DJ serial killer. It's full of tonal shifts and quirky choices like that. There is this distinct personality and flair to it that I think is really charming. From its setting to its dialogue to its music, it's always making choices that either land or don't, but not many of them are generic or typical for the era the game was created. I couldn't rightly say that Shadow Man is one of the best games ever made, but it may have resulted in one of the most considerate and successful remasters of a game I've seen yet. This is quite literally what the concept of remastering a game should result in. People have built this expectation of them that they just take a game that came out like 5 years ago and then like add ray tracing and like more pouches on the main character's belt. I think its gameplay was initially pretty rough, but now that it's been sanded down, it's markedly more accessible and more comfortable and even enjoyable. But if you're someone that had a pre-existing aversion to games that ask a lot of your time, Shadow Man is probably asking for more than you'd be willing to give. He's gonna be texting you at all hours of the day, and if you don't respond within 10 minutes, he'll send 3 question marks. I think there will always be an audience for this type of thing though, especially the easier it is to access a piece of media. It's funny how that works. People will find it, and some will connect with it, and some won't. Such is the way of art. You get something from it, or you don't. And I think you have a better chance of determining that if you don't have to jump through hoops or go on some kind of internet vision quest or shell out a whole month's pay just to determine it's too old. I don't like things that are old. Mortality scares me. That's the end of the video. Thank you for watching the video. If you liked the video, please consider supporting the production of similar videos on Patreon. Aside from allowing me the access to food, it grants you the access to the secret menu. Currently a quadrilogy of videos concerning various paranormal subjects, the most recent being a 4-hour examination of a famed haunted location and its eccentric curator. Here's a brief clip of it.
This is blessed holy water from a priest, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. This is the doll. I'm not gonna hold her for...
He really stuffed her in there, huh? I don't know why I thought she was gonna be framed in foam, like a piece of camera equipment or something. He just sat on that thing to close it, little bits of red yarn poking out the edges.
This is the doll. I'm not gonna hold her for long.
Zach is so horny for Annabelle.
Am I allowed to touch her? No. Oh no. Don't touch her.
He's fucking starstruck, bro. He's crawling for her.
I just want to touch her so bad. No, don't.
If you do, you're inviting evil right to you.
I'll accept it.
So that's the kind of thing that's going on there, and there's a lot of it. Anyways, thank you for watching, thank you for supporting, and an extra special thanks to Ailing Uncle, 2Password for Kids, Aaron Kwolek, Agendine, Alexander Smith, Anarcho Himbo, Andre Perkins, Annabelle Fuchs, Aparts 89, Ari Orison, Audio Video, Bayard Brown, Ben Carnell, Ben Oliver, Big Abuela Energy, Close Quarter Wombat, Cole, Cormick, Kronicki, D-Sky, Daniel Streb, Dante de Glanville, Daphne Pittendry, Dark Raptor 86, Dead Tired Dad, Deluminati, Der Capitan, The Real Michael King, Dirk by Default, Dirt Person, Dr. Beard, Dongs.exe, Edgy, Edward Avila, Fart Mother,
Garbage Day!
Grimbeard has my undying loyalty and credit card, Grime Bear, Grok, High Food Court, Ludex Alexander, Jack the Dave, Jared Bynum, Jason Corbin, Jay Alamin, J-Bo, John Dreffs, John John Boring, Joseph Zanoni, Justin Harper, Kay Wiley, Carrot, Catherine Amelia, Labor Delenda Est, Mac Bellegarde, Michael Schmidt, Naki Naki, who's there? Noise Tank 01, not a name, Octo, oh my god, Amba Singh, Ona Hill, Puke Skywalker, formerly 410,757,864,530 gay cops, Race You to Space, Ray Fox, Roland, Saiko Gekido, Salvatore Tosti, Samuel Vanderplatz, Schlongva, Snapplefish, Zoviel Fucht, Zoviel Abaglabe Vodem Wieden Grashamentiha, Stephen Kick, Takeout, Tessuyan, That Iru Guy Loves You. This deal is getting better all the time. Two Stan, Tyler Collins, Where Am I? Help, Witless Moth, Worm, Zach Bishop. After much consideration and some credit card fraud, I've decided Piss Missile is a bit crass. Come Cannons where it's at, yo. Alfred Correa, Azog Thoth, Chris Miner, El Jazzguar, Eto, Ava Nerve, Giraffa. I'm really trying to think of a funny name involving goblins. Jeremy Silver, June Choi, Catherine Graven, Lore, Mr. Alpacleton, Savvy Fave, Smokey Jefferson, Swoot Operator, T-Dog 8083, Zach Bagans, Lead Investigator for the IRS, A Hanging Chad, Albert Hunley, Alex Walton, Aranai Saez, Binary Vision, Brady, The Sanity Tax Collector, Brozoof Jones, Cantankerous, Chimichanga Jones, Kodamite, Daddy Reznor, Daniel Moen Larson, David Offord, DeForzi, Drunken Badger, Fiona Summers, Fix My Brain, Gareth Farrow, Grass Eater, Grounded Valkyrie, Have a Wonderful Day, James Andrew Perla Adams, James Snipes, Jetson Jampel, Nawang Lopsang Yeshe Tenzin Gyatso, J-Man DX, Jonathan Pence, Larotica, The News Elf, Mad Monty 98, Make It Raynor, Name Requires DLC, Neb, Ophelia Fishwife, P. Dizzle, Persian Air, Pickblick, Quality Pleasures, Raul Garcia, Robert Brandon, Rowdy Roddy Peeper, Same Jima, Rat Roundup's #1 fan, Sonderbomb, Sorry I'm No Hero, Sugarboo, T, Technica, T Stony, 10-Beat, The Angry Pebble, The Condroid, 2 Legs, 12 trans rats in a trench coat, 17 turtles in a tracksuit, 77 Elvis the King, a big gay rat, a squatting necromancer hanging at the local crypt, ASD 666, a shireling, Adan, Eris Arlecchino, Alistair Stewart, Ali G, Alistair Grout, All Cops Are Bingle Bongles, All Hands on Dick, Andrew That was really the comedy streak, eh? Andrew Light, Andrew Lebrano, Andy Krieger, Andy P, Ashley Hillsman, Astro Shepherd, Atari Steed, Osella, Auspicious Whiskers, Babylon Broken, Balton, B Top, Beef, Ben and Cara Dowling, Benjamin Payne, Best Tiger, Bibby Effin Blocksberg, Bindle, Birth Was a Mistake, Life is a Curse, I Live My Life Despite the Universe, Bishy 98, Biddles 99999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999999 Brandon Frost, Brett Weaver, Broccoli Goblin, Caleb Zane Kelly, Cameron Spoon, Case, Cerberus Arms, Crisps989, Christopher Lawrence, Clayton J. Freund, Colby, Cole Bramlett, Cole Beep, Captain Canty, Captain Jax, Crispy Jack, Crispy J, Cult of Lita, Cyborg Number Blue, Danny Kilpatrick, Danny Summerlin, Dapney, David Fromke, David Harpstrite, Dazed Clockwork, Denny J.A., Destriga, Devana Upperrock, Dicky Tater, Dirty Space Rat, Dom, yes, that Dom, wait no, not that one, the other Dom, Dr. Grimbeard's Dino Nuggy Suppository Surprise, Dragon Gal Aggie, Dunny Zero, Eben Hullab, Eben Sullivan, Elder Maza, MV.exe, Eric Andrews, Ethan Blue, Udiptes, Everyday, Once a Day, Give Yourself a Putty, Eyeballzilla, Farrakhan, I feel like you tried to help me out there and maybe pushed me further away from the truth. 15 gargantuan low poly rats listening to Jungle. Flame 5029 Neo 8. Frank Orifice. Fried Potato. Frolics with Bunnies. Fuzzy Tingle Times. Game is Good. Gavin. General Klazara. Ghoul Baby Bond. Gloomorous. Goatee Galaxy. Goofy Touch Me. Grim Puntango. Grimby's my big baby boy. Grim X Dracula. Gumpy Wumpy the Dwarven Fingerer. Gurneel. Haley Bobella. Harry Mason's Weird Feet. Hey, would you blow me? Hentai McToon Boob. High Res Titan. Hime Rowan. Hitoshi-san. Hold on! Those aren't my shoes. Horror Show 93, Hrothdale, Hug, Huron Lockhart, Hyborian Age Space Marine, I Fart on My Hands, Ideas Theet, Ilya Idamkin, I'm Not Tyler Allen, INTJ loves her INTP, Irish Wristwatch, Irish Wristwatch, Irish Wristwatch, Jacob O'Callahan, Jacques Louvier, Jake, James Kelly, Jamie Faulkner, Jameson Calvert, Jeff Ladd, Jennifer Goshal, Jeremy Langell, Joshua David, just give me a name. Susan, Justin Darnell, Captain Ketchup, Carragera, Karen Rosenow, Kayla Bivens, Kieran Walker, Kelly O'Neill, Kevin Hanley, Kevin Hale, Key Lime Pie, Kid Charlemagne, the FCC Can't Catch Me, Kind Raccoon, Kingyo Ningyo, Clarstrup, Chris Odie, Christina Downs, Crusteasy, Kurok the Famished One, Lakshasa, Lori Kubri, Leland Miliokis, Leopold Gloom, Legendary Dragon, Lobotomy IQ, Luke Reynolds, M, Magic Meows, Mandalore Gaming, Mango, Mango Roxas, Marquois, Mason Trapp, Matthew St. J, Matthew Work, Max Cohen, Maxwell Villers, Mioang, Micah J. Best, Michael Anderson, Michael Yates, Miles Phillips, fuck, Monster Train, Moon Unit, More Sharks, Mortis on Fire, Mother Destruction, Mr. Ducky Quack, Mystical Int, No Stars, Nex42, Nick Hooper, Nick Timmons, Nicholas Polestar, Nolite Tebestarts, Barundrum, Nuclear Sun, Nolram, Opichi Kostra, Origami Zergling, Paranoid Vampire, Pathetically Hopeful, Paul Fierce, Pazuzu, Philip Woolley, Philip Coffee, Picture, Pogo Daddy, Radia, Replicant, Ruibi Somem, Scofflades, Sentient Turtle, Shadanon, Shade, Sean the Prawn, Silatixo, Slatanic, Some Dumb Queer Named May, Soy Flowers, Spooky Schaefer, Startide, Stewie's 77, Super Scary Saturday, Suzuya Rose, Team R, The Clay Pigeon, The Supervisor, Tiggles McSwiggles for the Gits and Shiggles, Toaster Child, Tom, Tori, Trenton Wilkins, Tutant Mean Age Needle Teetle, V, Val, I've bribed this YouTuber to relay this message from Galley to you. Hello. Vince Van Diesel, Vincent Cronin, Whirling in Rags, Wintermute, Wolf Chalice Logician, Wudgie, Ya Boy Weeaboo Jones, Zanga PF, Zarataro VT, Zdenic Benez, Zan, Zongingu, Zombie Fevers, Whoop De Whoop, Zuli, The Little Blue Kobold, and Put a Little Dirt Under My Pillow for the Dirt Man for being a patron. Thank you so much for all your support. Couldn't do it without you. Couldn't do much of anything without you. It's actually quite terrifying how dependent I am on you. I was this close to making one of those patron videos public, but then I was like, no, that would betray the most loyal amongst them. Let them have their little treats. What do we got? We got some gaming updates. What have I been gaming? I played through that recent Alone in the Dark game twice to experience both characters' storylines. A brief review for it, I'd say it's exceptionally serviceable. In like a noteworthy sense. It's like perfectly a AA game, and there's no real reason why it received the fate it did. But I feel like we need those. We need more of those. We need more games that you used to refer to as a rental. It's a little jank, it's a little outdated, it's a little bit trying to ape off recent things. It's the best of no worlds. But as I said in the video, it's got a cool soundtrack, and I love both of the actors, in and outside of the game. And I thought it was very strange that like they don't have two different storylines you experience so much as whichever character you choose, the game sort of assumes that's the main character. So like all the events happen to them, but they have different responses to it. So it's not like there was this other plot line happening while the character wasn't on screen. It was just you pick which one will be the main character. I don't know, I'm just yapping now. Thank you.
Release the dark soul and take it into yourself. But be warned, the dark souls are a pure and ancient evil and possess a power that should not be abused.